The following is a paid political announcement.
Lifelong Democrat Diana Florence served for 25 years as a Manhattan prosecutor under DA Robert Morgenthau. She put criminals away, stood up for victims, and protected our streets. Now, Diana is challenging failed Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg as an independent because it's time for a DA who fights for our families, not criminals. That's why Diana has won the support of organized labor like the steam fitters, plumbers, and ironworkers, everyday New Yorkers who want a DA they can trust. Manhattan needs a DA who will do the job, prosecute crime. That's Diana Florence. Under Alvin Bragg, crime is up and prosecutions are down. Bragg doesn't prosecute crime. He plays partisan politics. Bragg failed to protect women and failed to protect workers. As a prosecutor, Diana Florence won groundbreaking convictions, fighting against corruption, domestic violence, wage theft, and daily working conditions. She's always been a partner of unions, community groups, and to cops like us. For Manhattan District Attorney, vote for Diana Florence. Diana4DA.com. Paid for by Diana for Manhattan DA.
The More Money Show with Steve Moore on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome, folks. This is the More Money Show. I am economist Steve Moore. Thank you so much for joining. I'm so appreciative of our great audience and our great ratings. We are all over the country now in stations all the way from Los Angeles to Kansas City to Chicago to Maine, down in Georgia, and, of course, in the entire New York metropolitan area. So thank you so much for carving out a little of your time this weekend to join us. Have a great show this weekend. And I want to start with telling you how angry I am. I'm angry about what is going on in Washington, the dysfunction, the fact that we have had this government shutdown now for 10 days. Whether there will be a resolution anytime soon, who knows? I hope so. But the fact of the matter is that this is the Schumer shutdown. And I'm not a person who always takes the Republican side. I've lived through 15 of these shutdowns over my 40-year career in the swamp of Washington, D.C. But I got to tell you, this is something that Chuck Schumer wanted. He is putting the country's economy at risk. We're seeing a lot of flights delayed this week. We're seeing a lot of havoc in terms of people not getting the checks that they are supposed to receive. Government services have been disrupted. For what? For what? For Chucky Schumer saying, I don't want $1.5 trillion of savings in the budget out of $80 trillion over the next 10 years. Do the math here, folks. $1.5 trillion of savings out of $80 trillion is less than it's roughly a 2% reduction in spending. 2%, 2 cents out of every dollar. And Schumer is going on TV these days saying people are going to die. They're going to die. They're going to get sick. They're not going to get emergency care coverage. I mean, it is outrageous, these claims. Now, I've got to tell you this. I've been in this game a long time. I remember when I and many others of my friends and colleagues who are free marketeers. I'm a free market guy. I don't like big government, and I think big government is going to be the doom of America if we continue on this path. We are borrowing $2 trillion a year. We're spending $7 trillion. We're going to spend $80 trillion over the next 10 years. And he doesn't want to take a tiny sliver. And he's saying if we cut any government spending, people are going to die. Now, folks, I'm going to tell you this. If we keep spending and borrowing like this, people are going to die. This is going to destroy our economy, despite Donald Trump's best efforts to put America first and to make sure that we have good trade deals, that we have the lowest taxes, that we have less regulation, that we are making sure that every American has a good job. And we've created a lot of jobs under Trump. Despite all of that, we've got a government shutdown. And it was completely unnecessary. Now, what is he fighting for? What is Schumer fighting for? He wants it. I've discussed this in previous weeks. He wants illegal immigrants to get free health care. He just wants it. If you look at the bill, his bill, it says it repeals the provision in the Republican bill that says if you're going to get free health care, you have to be an American citizen or a legal resident. Is there anybody who actually thinks that people who are not legal residents of the country should be getting free health care? Now, look, if it's let's say an illegal immigrant working in the fields and has a terrible accident and goes to the emergency room, I don't want to deny people of emergency care. Of course not. We're going to treat people. But the idea that you can come into this country and get free health care, free food, free housing, free this, free that. Sorry, nope, that's not good. And by the way, immigrants don't come into this country for that. 95% of them come into the country because they want to work and prosper and share our freedoms and economic opportunity and become Americans. And that I'm all for that. I am all for that. I'm just saying, folks, there are, 6 billion people on this planet. 6 billion people. And as so many of my immigrants friends tell me, whether they're from Africa, whether they're from Asia, whether they're from South America, everybody wants to come to the United States. They want to come to the U.S. of A. And great. I mean, look, if you can contribute, I want you to come. But you cannot come. We cannot provide free health care for 6 billion people, folks, or we will bankrupt our country. So let's bring this thing to an end. I don't want Trump to blink here because we need the savings and we need to make the economy boom. And we're not giving out free health care to people who aren't working, who could be working, and we're not going to give free health care to people who are illegal immigrants. It's that simple. And if you're for the other side, God love you, but I'm sorry, I don't understand the logic of that. All right, folks, we'll be right back. This is the More Money Show. I am a little angry. I'm a little angry with the way things are going, but I love this country. I love this president, and I think we can resolve this very simple. Just let's get on with it. Let's let Trump's budget stand because it's a good budget, and we're still going to be spending record amounts of money. I'll be right back.
The More Money Show with Steve Moore on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The More Money Show with Steve Moore.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show. I have two of the world's experts on healthcare and the federal budget. And we're going to have a good conversation about this because I want to educate you all about what's really going on in Washington, what's going on with the healthcare system. I want to ask these gentlemen if people are really going to die. Is the federal budget that Donald Trump wants, is it going to kill people? Because that's what Chuck E. Schumer is saying. So Phil Kerpen is the president of American Commitment. He also works with me at Unleash Prosperity as our executive director and does a fantastic job and is an expert in healthcare. And then we have the great Thomas Phillipson, who was the chief economist for Donald Trump in his first term. So that's an incredibly lofty title and did amazing work for President Trump at the Council of Economic Advisors. Gentlemen, thanks for joining. Tom Phillipson, let's start with you. Chuck Schumer says people are going to die if we don't pass his budget.
Yeah, that's always the call. It's a very, very frequent call. Whenever you touch health care, people are going to die. Larry Summers was on that same message in 2017 when we passed the tax reform that people were going to die. Here's some evidence that's relevant to that. People have studied a lot what happens when Medicaid got expanded in the early 90s and on. There was a lot of expansions, and that was for a much poorer population than the current expansions that are taking place, obviously. And what happened was that 90% of the new Medicare beneficiaries came from private insurance, so what's called crowd out, that basically the public insurance just crowded out private insurance.
Hold on, you said, by the way, you just said Medicare, you meant Medicaid, right?
Medicaid, sorry.
Okay. Yeah, that's okay.
So basically, 90% of the people in the early expansions came from private insurance, meaning their insurance status was not affected by the Medicaid expansions. Their pocketbooks were, because they're now getting their premium subsidized by other taxpayers, essentially. But the insurance status was not. And again, this was for a much poorer population than the expansion of Medicaid into the middle class that took place both for eligible people in the COVID pandemic, but also a lot of ineligibles that the Democrats handed out the Medicaid to very loosely during the pandemic.
Who are some of these, quote, ineligible people? I mean, obviously some of them are illegal immigrants, a lot of them, but who else would qualify as ineligible that's getting Medicaid coverage?
Well, there's two criteria to be eligible: asset and income tests, essentially. And what Democrats did was expanded it to beyond those levels. They didn't care to check the income. They just handed it out, essentially. So we don't know exactly how many people there are. But Brian Blase at the Paragon Institute has done a lot of work in this area and found that there was a lot of misallocation beyond eligible. So that's really bypassing Congress. You know, when DOGE wanted to cut this, it was argued that DOGE was bypassing Congress, but this is really bypassing Congress, because once you spend, there's no act that says we shall spend on ineligible people,
well, by the way, Tom, just to interrupt you for a second, the U.S. General Accounting Office, I mean, the auditors of the federal government say $150 billion of fraud in Medicaid per year. So that's a huge number.
There's a lot of fraud in Medicaid, but also in Medicare, more importantly. So Medicare as a crime is the biggest crime we have in the U.S., essentially, before illegal drugs or, larger than illegal drugs, et cetera, because the dollar amounts are so large. Florida was the state where most of that occurred, because there's a lot of old people in Florida, obviously. But there's been a crackdown on that the last decade, I would say. But it's a lot of fraud in the Medicare program in particular.
So I want to turn this over to now Phil Kerpen. That's a great explanation of what's going on here. Now, Phil, you and I are old enough to remember when Obamacare passed, which was, I believe, in 2010.
That's right.
10.
Yeah.
And I thought we were told by Barack Obama that this was going to solve all our health care problems, and everyone was going to be covered by care, and that it was going to be affordable for everyone. And since then, health care costs have basically doubled. That doesn't sound very affordable to me. So in other words, I think the villain here in this whole dispute about health care is a result of the fact that Obamacare has completely failed in its promises.
Yeah, no question. And, we did a paper last year at Unleash with Casey Mulligan and Brian Blades, who was actually joined with Unleash and Paragon. And we went through all of the promises that Obama made and kind of updated where we are on them. And you're correct. Every single one was broken. Every single promise. He said prices would go down. They've gone up. He said that, they'd make college more affordable instead of the student loan disaster happened. He said,
Wait, hold on. What does this have to do? Remind my listeners, what does this have to do with student loans?
That was one of the funding mechanisms. They said, we're going to nationalize student lending. So instead of the banks doing student lending with a federal guarantee, it's all going to be direct from the Treasury instead.
And they said, by the way, hold on. So they said that was going to save money?
Yeah, they said we're going to make so much money. Instead of the banks making the money, we're going to take all this money, we're going to use it to pay for Obamacare. And within 2 years, they were already losing money on the loan.
Right.
And then, of course, now they want to lose as much as possible by actively forgiving them. So, so that's part of the Obamacare.
It's a laughable proposition, folks. I mean, they were going to use the student loan bailouts as a way to somehow, to save money for taxpayers. That didn't happen, and then the costs exploded. It's no wonder, Phil, that we have a $2 trillion budget deficit.
Yeah, well, it's unbelievable. But the other thing is just, Steve, the way they structured the subsidies, there was no incentive for anyone to contain costs. Because what they basically did is they said, you're only going to pay a certain percentage of your income, and then everything above that, the taxpayers pick up. And so if you're and they also regulated the insurance companies, and they said you can never make more than 20% of total premiums. The rest you've got to pay out in claims. So the only way the insurance companies make money is if the prices go up. But the customers don't care if the prices go up, because any increase gets absorbed by taxpayers.
Unbelievable. So it's a big mess. And
to add to the student loan debacle, right?
I had forgotten about that was the pay for.
The student loan, the U.S. government has the lowest cost of capital in the world, and they couldn't run a student loan program that was profitable. But I think that was by design, because obviously when students get loans, they go to the Democratic boot camp called academia, and then basically get schooled to vote for the party. So I think, I don't think this was sort of a mistake. I think it's designed to basically subsidize as much academic enrollment as you can.
Yeah, because, the universities don't have any money. Oh, yes, they do. They have $800 billion endowment that was tax-free, and yet we're giving them more and more money. I think Trump, Tom, is trying to do something about that. The fact that, I think one of the greatest financial scandals in the country, other than the high cost of health care, is the high cost of college tuition.
Well, again, it's subsidized, right? So when you subsidize demand, prices go up usually, and schools are no different for that. I think they're trying to privatize it more. There's no underwriting. Whenever you get a loan in the private sector, you have to prove you're credit worthy. Obviously, that's not taking place in these loans and the student loans. But again, I think it's just a misnomer to think Democrats don't understand this. They just want as much money as possible to get into universities.
Oh, well, the same thing with the healthcare thing. This wasn't by accident that they put more and more people under the federal system. This is exactly what they wanted, Phil. They wanted to have their end game is just to have a national government-run healthcare system.
Well, it's interesting because the big debate, you remember back during Obamacare, the big debate is, will there be a government-run public option plan in the Obamacare exchanges? And the insurance companies played the most magnificent double game I've ever seen in terms of lobbying, because under their own brand, under America's Health Insurance Plan, they ran hundreds of millions of dollars of ads saying, pass Obamacare, we need health care for everyone. And then they spent a similar amount through the U.S. Chamber saying, do not include a public plan, that's socialism. And so we got sort of this corporatist system where essentially you have this extremely regulated, extremely subsidized product, and at one point it was mandatory as well, although that's since been repealed. And the big thing that the companies just wanted was don't have a government plan in there for us to compete against, make everyone buy our plans.
Right. So we only have a minute left, Phil. I wanted to ask you this.
We're not going to tolerate all this money going to these companies, and it is going to be government.
Yeah. And, look, I think that one of the villains in this whole story is the health insurance companies. They have made a deal with the devil, and now we basically have the federal government subsidizing all of their health insurance plans, and the stocks of the health insurance companies have gone through the roof. And to me, this plays right into the hands of Bernie Sanders, who at some point is just going to say, look, if the government's paying for it, what do we even need the health insurance companies for?
He's been saying that all along, and frankly, I'm getting more sympathetic to that view, Steve. I mean, I'm against socialized care, but is it better if United Health is running everything and it's all our tax dollars? Is that better than if it's a government agency? What's the difference, really?
You can't make this stuff up, folks. Okay, I'm going to ask Tom and Phil to stick around for one more segment. In this next segment, I want to ask both of them, can we have an Operation Warp Speed for cancer, for heart disease, for multiple sclerosis, for diabetes, for all of these killer diseases? I say yes. I want to hear what these gentlemen say. This is the More Money Show. We'll be right back.
The More Money Show with Steve Moore on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The More Money Show with Steve Moore.
Entertaining and informative
on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
We're back, folks. This is the More Money Show. I'm economist Steve Moore. Always a thrill and a privilege to be with you every weekend. Thanks for tuning in. I have two of the top healthcare experts in the country on with me. Thomas Phillipson, who served as the chief economist for Donald Trump in his first term at the Council of Economic Advisors, and Phil Kerpen, who runs a group called American Commitment, works with me at Unleash Prosperity, and also an expert on healthcare. Tom, I want to start with you, if I may. You and I have a piece that we've been working on where we're talking about an Operation Warp Speed for finding cures to all of these terrible diseases. And you were telling me, because you worked at the White House when we did Operation Warp Speed for COVID, which was really a miraculous, it saved a lot of lives. Tell us about how that worked and whether this could work for other drugs.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually an interesting story on Operation Warp Speed. We were in deep talks with FDA in late 19 before COVID on reforming or deregulating FDA. The FDA commissioner and CA actually had sort of a mini plan. That all got scrapped, obviously, when COVID came, but it was sort of the fuel to Operation Warp Speed that people have been thinking about it before actually the pandemic arrived. There was actually a report in September 2019 from the CEA.
Wow.
Saying that we should have a private and public partnership if there is a pandemic to get vaccines out quickly.
You mean even before COVID? Even before COVID?
Yeah, this was 4 months before COVID.
Wow.
We obviously had no idea how timely it was. But it's important because that was percolating within the White House when COVID hit, essentially.
Okay.
So we were sort of up and running already and thinking about this. And I think there's no reason why we couldn't, Trump was sort of, when COVID came, he was kind of, we've already been talking about this, why can't we push him again, essentially, at FDA? Yeah. So that was very, very important, I think, to get things going very, very quickly. Now,
and by the way, can I just let me just interrupt you for a second, because I remember the second part of this, which is that Trump announced Operation Warp Speed for a vaccine, and the New York Times and the Washington Post and everyone laughed at him. I mean, the New York Times had a famous editor. It said this is going to take 3 or 4 years, and you guys did it in what, 10 months?
It was like 9 months or something like that, yeah.
And Trump does not get the credit. I mean, how many millions of lives worldwide were saved by that incredible...
Yeah, no, I mean, we had a study on the lives were saved, but also it opened up the economy, which was even more valuable. Yep. So, the whole world economy opened up with these new vaccines, essentially, and you saved us from the crazy lockdowns that took place. So the gain in economic activity actually swamped any health effects from the vaccine.
All right, so I want to swing over to Phil Kerpen now. So, Phil, what I'm arguing and what Thomas have been arguing is why can't we do this for other diseases? We've found so many frustrations. We've had a lot of pharmaceutical companies who've come to us and small biomedical companies who've said, look, we have a really promising cure for diabetes. We have something that can deal with early stage Alzheimer's. Some of these neurological diseases, which are horrible and paralyze people and a terrible way to die and to live. And I don't understand the logic. If you've got a promising drug, why does it have to go through 6 years of trial, sometimes 10 years before these drugs can be put on the market? I just think that's inhumane. Why not let people have the right to try these drugs if they're not going to, do harm?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you on that. I think this is, and of course we have a right to try law now, but most manufacturers don't want to make their products available with the right to try because they want people to enroll in the clinical trial because they need the data to get through FDA to get to the broader market. And so there's some chicken and egg problems there. But, the thing that I think is so interesting about Operation Warp Speed is it really wasn't the government money that made the vaccines happen. It was the regulatory reforms and speeding up the pipeline. That was really the key thing. In fact, the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine did not take the government money. It was not one of the grant vaccines. And you compare that with, for instance, there was the Novavax vaccine that got a lot of government money and never made it to market until really the pandemic was mostly over. And that one, they didn't partner with one of the majors the way BioNTech did, and so they didn't really have the wherewithal to run through the regulatory gauntlet, even with kind of loosened standards. And they got hung up in manufacturing processes and other things. So the regulations are the key, and streamlining and lowering the requirements is critical. And I've always been a fan of the idea of letting products come to market once they pass safety testing instead of requiring efficacy. That's where so much of the cost comes in.
Milton Friedman, Thomas, wrote a famous article when, about 30 or 40 years ago saying, the FDA actually ends up killing people when they hold a drug, let's say a cancer drug that's going to save 50,000 lives a year, and they put out a big press conference, press release saying, this drug is going to save 50,000 lives. And Milton said, well, if you'd put the the drug on the market 2 years earlier, you might have saved 100,000 lives.
Most people, including me, believe that there's some role for the government to have safety trials.
Yes.
But there's a 1962 amendment to FDA which mandates that not only should they be safe, they should also be effective. And that's where the money is spent on the phase 3 trials, they're called, the big trials where a lot of time and a lot of patients are lined up. Now, that's a problem because, no other very few industries has the government come in and had to verify your quality of your product, as opposed to we do have safety regulations for cars, etc., but the quality of the product is basically monitored by or insured or have to be granted, if you want, by the bureaucrats. And we did a study on what's called the Prescription Drug User Fee Act, which speeded up FDA with using user fees paid by the companies to speed up FDA. And the speed benefits of saving people with faster marketing of these drugs just swamps any safety effects. Even if you assume every adverse event after these acts were implemented was due to the act, which is an extreme upper bound, that's still only about a third of the value of getting the speed faster to market of these beneficial drugs.
Well, if you think about people, Phil, who have, let's say, MS or Parkinson's or some of these just horrible neurological disorders, people want to be in the trials. People are lining up to be in the trials before the drug is officially put on the market because they want hope. And to me, look, maybe the drug will work, maybe it won't, but what's the alternative? People die a terrible death and they're in pain and suffering. So I just don't get the logic of it, Phil, and I want Operation Warp Speed. Let's get these things on the market as quickly as possible.
Yeah, here's the thing that's so amazing. So we require all of these products to go through these very extensive efficacy testing for some specific indicated usage. But then doctors end up writing them for other things that they were never tested for, that they figure out that they work for. And so in so many instances, the actual things that the drugs get used for, they were never efficacy tested for. So what was it, what was the logic of the delay? And, the market ultimately will decide. Doctors and patients will decide which treatments are worth using and which are not. And so I think we could really cut the timeline dramatically with deregulation. And the current Commissioner of Food and Drugs is moving in this direction. He's created a voucher program for, sort of national priorities to get expedited treatment. But, I think that could be expanded dramatically if we scale back the effectiveness.
So, Joe, we just have a minute left, and we're talking about how we can bring life-saving drugs to the market more quickly. And in just our last minute, Thomas, because you've dealt with this bureaucracy, what is the holdup? Why is it that the FDA resists this? Is it just bureaucracy?
Well, they have a mandate from Congress. They have to basically enforce that mandate. Otherwise
we have to change that law.
Yeah, they need to change that law of the 1962 law in order for this to take place. That might be unlikely, but the key point here is that a lot of public
hold on, I don't agree. I don't think that's unlikely. I think I bet 80% of our listeners agree with what we're saying. That if you got a potentially life-saving drug for some of these horrible diseases, let people use it. Whether it's for epilepsy.
The key is that the insurance companies are going to be the gatekeepers.
Oh.
They're not going to pay for crap, and they're already sometimes rejecting FDA-approved drugs. So you're telling the FDA is not doing a service, holding something up essentially, and many times, like Phil emphasized, off-label use, particularly in oncology, which is half the FDA pipeline roughly, off-label use is the major use of these things, which is, like Phil said, the private sector determining whether this is working or not, as opposed to the government.
So, Phil, I want to swing this back to you because Thomas is right. That's, by the way, Tal Philipson, who was the chief economist for Donald Trump in his first term and an expert on healthcare. But this idea that somehow this is going to cost the insurance companies and the medical care system more money. Drugs are the cheapest way to deal with diseases. What's the alternative? Putting people in hospitals and in nursing homes and things of that nature. So I don't even think that I think this would actually not just save lives, but save money.
Drugs are the only product that expensive, that are expensive for a fixed term, the patent life, and then gets very, very cheap.
Right.
That is so unique and so different from everything else, especially in healthcare, where hospital services have gone to the moon because of consolidation and other cost drivers. And so you're correct. You're absolutely correct that, the long-term economic benefits, cost benefits of prescription drug innovation are very, very large. And in fact, even CBO has finally come around to admit that prescription drug innovation lowers the long-term costs for Medicare, which is really important for the budget debate.
So one last thing I wanted to mention to you, swinging it back to you, Thomas Phillipson, is one of the drugs you and I, we've talked to people who have a very promising drug now for early Alzheimer's that can delay it can't cure Alzheimer's, but delay the very negative effects of memory loss. And I just turned 65. I think that kind of thing is something that people in their 50s and 60s could use to delay the onset of that horrible disease, Alzheimer's.
Yeah, no, the Alzheimer's and diabetes, and those are big spending diseases in Medicare. Diabetes is associated with about a third of Medicare spending on diabetics. So these are important things. And I wanted to mention, too, in regards to that, I think 85% of healthcare spending occurs on things where the government is not approving quality, such as procedures, surgery, whatever. Mm-hmm. And the private sector sorts that out, whether it's working or not. So what's so unique about drugs that we need to have 10 years to wait for these things to go on the market with sort of bureaucratic hurdles, when for the rest of healthcare, the vast majority of healthcare, the private market with doctor, organizations and publications on how these things work, etc., sort out what's working or not. And I think, the government bureaucrats think they're the only way to determine if things work or not. And we need double-blind trials for 10 years to determine this. And I think it's so misguided because there's alternatives to doing that in the private sector.
Well, one last point, Phil, we literally have a minute left, is that the cost of delaying the introduction of these drugs is not just the fact that people, are going to lose access to a potentially life-saving drug, but it also reduces the amount of money that's invested in drug research because it costs $500 million oftentimes to bring a drug to market. Sometimes these companies run out of capital before they can bring the drug to market.
Yeah, it's we've created a system that's so bureaucratic look, part of it is just the nature of discovery. You're going to have a lot of sort of dry holes before you find a gusher. Right. You got to find a way to recover those costs. But a lot of it is the regulatory costs and the delays and the compliance burdens. And if we could bring down the cost of bringing new drugs to market, we would get a lot more drugs. No question about it. We'd be able to finance a lot more of them, and we'd get the benefits from that. And so I do think that there's a huge opportunity here. Mm-hmm. The challenge, of course, is a lot of people hate the drug companies. Yeah,
why? Well, that's for a future conversation. I want to bring you guys back because, look, there are problems with the drug industry, but they save millions and millions of lives, and I don't understand how they've turned into villains. If there's villains, folks, in the healthcare industry, it is the health insurance companies, not the people who create these life-saving drugs. We're going to do Operation Warp Speed. We're going to get Operation Warp Speed for all of these killer diseases. I just feel it. I think, Thomas, you and I are onto something here. I know that Trump people are paying a lot of attention. So let's do it. Let's find these cures. Let's win the race. We'll be right back, folks. This is The More Money Show.
The More Money Show with Steve Moore on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The More Money Show with Steve Moore on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back, folks. This is The More Money Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. As I said in our previous segment, if you're just joining, we are going to win the race for the cure. We're going to, this is my dream, that we have an Operation Warp Speed for all of the terrible diseases that are curable with our great biomedical research. But the government is keeping life-saving drugs off of the market for too long, and I just think it's a disgrace, especially for people who are really suffering from these horrible diseases. Let's give people a try, okay? I mean, and if you disagree with that, I'd love to hear from you, but I think it's inhumane, and I think it's bad for our society. Wanted to just change directions for a minute in our last few minutes of the show. Big story this week. I don't know if you saw it, but the Germans are talking about not allowing people to retire until they reach the age of 73. This is the headline from the German newspaper. Work until 73 to save pension system, German experts warn. 73? 73 is going to be the retirement age. Now, why do they have to have a retirement age of 73? Because just like our Social Security system, theirs is running out of money. And this is a result of demographics. We have more and more older people. We have fewer and fewer younger people coming into the labor market and to pay into these systems. So now people are going to have to work another 10 years. Is that fair? And by the way, this idea is probably coming to America. I've warned about this, that they're going to basically say, sorry, we're out of money. You lose. You have to work another 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And all that money you put into the Social Security system, you're just out of luck. You're going to have to pay more, and that's not fair to our young people. By the way, it is. I have 5 sons. One's 18, one's 19, one's 24, one's 31, and one's 32. Between my wife and I, she has 2 boys. I have 3, and so we're one big happy family. But those guys, they're going to have to work 50 years to support the Social Security system, and then they'll get this lousy return out of it. I think that's so horrible. As many of you know who are regular listeners of the More Money Show, I feel very passionately about letting people put that money, that payroll tax money, into an individual retirement account like a 401k. Let it exploit what Albert Einstein called the most powerful force in the universe, which is compound interest. And if we did that, our kids would get 3 to 4 times higher return than they're getting from Social Security. And now they're saying, oh, by the way, you have to work till 73. You're going to get a crappy return out of that. The worst investment, if you're under the age of 40, the worst investment you will ever make in your life will be Social Security. So let's fix it. Let's fix it and let young people be liberated from a system and move it towards a defined contribution plan, not a defined benefit plan, because their benefit will be 2, 3, or 4 times larger. Well, every young person will retire with well over $1 million in their account if they were to be able to do that. And then we'll just have to, swallow the costs of Social Security for people like me. I just turned 65. But if you care about your kids, we've got to change this system, because 73, that's an old, then they're going to raise 75, and then everybody's going to die before they get Social Security, and they'll pay in their whole life for a system they don't get a dime out of. I don't get the logic of this, folks. I never have. I hope you will stick around for the second hour of the More Money Show, folks. Having a good time. And we're going to talk a lot about where do we go from here with respect to some of these cities and states that are losing so much money right now. That's coming up in the next hour. This is the More Money Show, and we will be right back.
The More Money Show with Steve Moore on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The More Money Show with Steve Moore.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show. Hope you're having a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much for joining. I'm economist Steve Moore. I hope that you are all getting our Unleash Prosperity Hotline, which is one of the most important things you have to read every morning. You can read it in 5 to 10 minutes. It's a really quick read. It's just 5 or 6 bullet items on what's going on with the economy, what's going on with politics, finance, how to make more money, and people love it. I boast on this because we get so much positive feedback that people saying, this is the caffeine. My caffeine in the morning is reading the Unleash Prosperity, and it's free. It costs you nothing. Sometimes the best things in life are really free. And by the way, if you get it and you don't like it, I don't want this anymore, you could just unsubscribe. But I think you really will love it. My friend Newt Gingrich says it's the first thing he likes to read every morning. He says, I get so many great ideas out of this. And we have a great team that puts it together, and it's free. It costs you nothing. So just go to unleashprosperity.com. Just click on Hotline, and we will send it to you at no cost. And as I said, if you don't like it, just say, yeah, this isn't for me, and just unsubscribe, and we won't. And by the way, we don't sell our list to people, so you're not going to get bombarded. And people say, oh, there's so many of these. And then they get it. They say, yeah, there are a lot of these, daily updates, emails, but this is the best. And, I'm going to boast on this because we have so many great people. John Fund does our politics section. We've got Phil Kerpen, who does our stuff on the economy, and it's a wonderful thing. And I hope you get it, because the Unleashed Prosperity is sponsored, as you know, by Steve Forbes, and it's was sponsored by Larry Kudlow until Fox News and Donald Trump stole him away from us, and of course the great Arthur Laffer, and our honorary chairman, by the way, is the owner of WABC, John Catsimatidis. So it's a great team, and we want you to be the smartest person in the room. So just get it. Unleashprosperity.com. So speaking of unleashprosperity.com, in our most recent edition of the newsletter, we have some really amazing statistics about what's happening in cities. Now, can you guess what city in America has lost the most residents of any city? This is the official census data from 2020 through July of 2024. So it's almost entirely up to date based on and by the way, the Census Bureau is the gold standard of counting people. They don't always do the best job, but it's not always completely accurate, but it's certainly the best measure we have of where people are moving to and from. And by the way, you can access all this data by going to votewithyourfeet.net. Votewithyourfeet.net, and you can just click on any pair of states. There's a big map, and you say, okay, how many people are moving from, let's say, New Jersey to Florida? And you click on New Jersey, and you click on Florida, and it'll show you the moving vans and how much money and people are leaving. So I want to give you some of these statistics, because we now are looking at the latest data from the census on cities. The city that has lost the most population, I think most of you probably know this if you're living in the New York area, has been New York. Let's see, that number, I'm just trying to read this, is 330,000 people have left New York on net. It's unbelievable. 330,000 people. That's a huge population loss. And these tend to be the successful people, the job creators, who are leaving, while the illegal immigrants and people who want welfare are coming into the city. And that's one of the reasons New York City is in so much danger of going bankrupt again. Now, let's look at some of these other cities. San Francisco has lost the second largest amount. Philadelphia, the third amount. My home city of Chicago lost 30,000 people in the last 4 years on net. That is, 30,000 more people moved out of Chicago than moved in. St. Louis has lost a lot of people. Los Angeles. How do you screw up Los Angeles? It's a beautiful city. Memphis, Baltimore, Portland. What do all these cities have in common? What do they have in common, folks? Well, who runs these cities? Oh, yeah, the progressives. Moore's theorem is that anytime progressive touch anything, they screw it up. They ruin everything that they touch. And you can see that in these great cities. And by the way, I love America's cities. I love New York. I love L.A. Chicago's got a special place in my heart. It is a great, great city. And yet it's my kind of town, Chicago, as Frank Sinatra would say. Why are we allowing this to happen? Why are we allowing our cities to die? So New York is shrinking because of people leaving. And now I want to show you some statistics related to this with respect to how many people are coming and going to various states. Not cities, but states. Now, these are pretty amazing statistics, because when people leave a state, they take income with them. And when they take income with them, they don't just take it the first year. In other words, if somebody permanently moves, let's say from Buffalo, New York, to Tampa, Florida, they are taking that money with them, not just in the first year, but the second, third, fourth, fifth. In other words, it accumulates. Now, I'm going to give you these numbers because it is really amazing what has happened with. I'm just calling this up on my computer right now as I speak because it's really okay. Here are the numbers. The state that has gained, here it is. It's unbelievable. Florida, under Ron DeSantis over the last 10 years, from other states has gained $1 trillion. $1 trillion of income. No wonder Florida is booming. $1 trillion. Texas has gained just under $300 billion. Billion dollars. Now, who are the losers here? Let's see. Let's go to the bottom of the list. I bet you know. I bet you can predict which states have been the big losers. Over the last 10 years, New York State has lost $500 billion of income. California has lost $370 billion. Again, how do you screw up? How did Gavin Newsom screw up California so much? Illinois, my home. I love Chicago. Half the people in Illinois live in Chicago. $315 billion of lost income. New Jersey. I know we have so many people in the New Jersey area. $170 billion has been lost. I know we have a lot of people in Connecticut. $90 billion has been lost. Massachusetts, $90 billion. I know we have a lot of people from Pennsylvania. $90 billion. There is a pattern here, folks. It is that when the progressives take over and when the Democrats, and again, I say this 1,000 times on the show, but I have to keep repeating it. I'm not a rah-rah Republican. I know Republicans are partly to blame for these problems, a curse on both of these parties, but my God, they're just ruining everything they're touching. Now, the other thing you have to understand about these statistics, let's see. New York, California, Illinois, New Jersey, Maryland, Massachusetts, Connecticut. What do those states have in common? Oh, they have very high income taxes on the rich. They have income taxes that go up to as high as 13, 14%. These are the states that whack it to the rich, soak the rich, and yet they're losing so much money. Now, the states at the top, Florida, Texas, Nevada, Washington, Tennessee, those are near the top. Those states have no income tax at all. No income tax. Hey, maybe if you don't try to soak the rich, you'll get more rich people and you get to pay your bills. That's my message to you. It is amazing. By the way, Washington State is a blue state, but they have one thing that saves them, and that is that they have no income tax. And the progressives there, the one thing that's making Washington and Seattle, keeping them from going drowning, is the fact they have no income tax. And of course, what do the progressives want to do in Washington State? Let's have a capital gains tax. Let's have an income tax. Let's have a dividend tax. Let's have a high corporate tax. In other words, they want to slay the goose that lays the golden eggs, which is the free enterprise system. And you look at these states, Florida, Texas, Arizona, South Carolina, North Carolina, they're all very low. Nevada. Why are people moving from California to Nevada? I guarantee you California is a lot nicer weather than Nevada, which is in the middle of the desert, and yet people are leaving. Folks, taxes matter. Great book by my friend Arthur Laffer and Brian Dimitrovich called Taxes Have Consequences. If you want to see the real effects of raising taxes, why there is a Laffer curve, you should get that book. So New York should not be raising their taxes, as some politicians want to do. They should be lowering them. If New York were to cut its income tax in half, I think you'd see the biggest boom ever, and New York would not be in jeopardy of losing Wall Street. I don't want to see that happen. I don't want to see the big bull on Wall Street leaving for Texas. It may happen. All right, folks, this is The More Money Show. I'll be right back.
The More Money Show with Steve Moore on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The More Money Show with Steve Moore.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back, folks. This is The More Money Show. Thanks so much for tuning in. I am not taking your calls this week. I'll take them next week, partly because there's just so much to cover that I want to get across to you. And it's always a privilege and a pleasure to be able to be in front of this microphone and talk to you about what's going on in America. I love this. And I love when people come up to me and they say, oh, I listened to you on the More Money Show, or I see you on Fox News, or whatever it is. I really appreciate that. And people are so nice. Even people go, I don't always agree with you, Steve Moore, but sometimes you make sense. And, that sounds like my wife. I guarantee you she doesn't agree with me a lot of times. But I think that's the essence of marriage, right? Being able to disagree and stay married. I've been married for 10 years right now. This is my second marriage. And this one's gonna last forever, I hope, because I love my wife, and she does put up with me. And I'm the first to admit I am not an easy person to get along with. Okay, so a lot happening this week that I want to bring you up to date, and a lot of what I'm going to be talking about comes right from our hotline. So again, I hate to be a pest on this, but I know a lot of people who listen to the More Money Show are not getting the hotline, and it's free. It makes no sense that you wouldn't want something that is free that we email to you every morning. If you just sign up, go to unleashprosperity.com and sign up just click on the button that says hotline, and we will send it to you. So one of the lead items is, one of the big stories this week is that gold went to 4,000. Just 6 years ago or so, gold was at 2,000. So 100% increase in gold prices. My son, who's 24, made a lot of money on this. He told me 5 or 6 years ago, gold prices were going to go up. Boy, was he right. So we have $4,000 gold. And amazingly, if you go back to the early 1970s, 50 years ago, the gold price was, $30 or $40. So it's gone up 100-fold in price. And that is not a good sign. That is not a good sign for the economy. When you have gold prices rise, people buy gold because they're afraid. They're afraid of the real economy. They're afraid of what's happening with our businesses. They're afraid of what's happening politically. It's as one of my friends says, you buy gold when you think the end of the world is coming. And also the reason people buy gold, of course, is it's a hedge against inflation. If you think inflation is coming, then you want to buy gold. Buy gold. And by the way, I'm not here to tell you to buy gold or not to buy gold. I'm not an investment advisor. I want to make you clear on that. But I thought I'd show you some of these statistics. So in the 1970s, when the gold price went from $30 to $300 or something like that, you had every single year just gigantic increases in the gold price. The economy was rotten. We had high inflation, and the stock market crashed. It crashed in the 70s. So gold price rising is generally associated with a bad stock market because people are selling their stocks and they're buying gold. And so one of the worst decades ever for the stock market was the 1970s. You'd have to go back to the 1930s for a worse decade for the stock market. That's what happened when gold prices rise. Now, whether that's a cause or an effect, I'm not sure. But I want to tell you this. If you look at what happened when Reagan came in, I'm looking at these numbers right now. I'm just going to recite some of these. In 81, the gold price went down by 33%. It went up a little bit by about 16% in 82 because there was a recession. People were very afraid. And then it went down by 17% in 1983. It went down by 19% in 1984. It did go up a bit in 85, 86, and 87, in part because the Reagan administration made one big mistake. They thought the dollar was too strong, and they wanted to weaken the dollar. And when you weaken the dollar, you increase the price of gold. But then these are amazing statistics. 88 and 89 and 90 and 91 and 92, the gold price fell. And then we have Bill Clinton come in. And the first year was terrible because Clinton did all the wrong things in his first year in office. I mean, that was when we had, remember, Hillary Care and the massive tax increase and all of these left-wing policies. And then Joe Biden, did I say Joe Biden? I meant to say Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton did something very smart and very good for the country. He moved from the left to the middle. He became a moderate New Democrat, and I really respect that about Bill Clinton. And he listened to the voters who said, no, we don't want to lurch this country to the left. I wish Biden had done that. And so here's the amazing thing. The gold price fell in 1994. It was stable in 95. It fell in 96. It fell in 97. It fell in 98. It went up very little bit in 99. It fell in 2000. the economy boomed during that period. We had a record stock market gain. So what I'm trying to tell you is, because most of you are investors and you want to make money, so here's the point. When stock markets fall, gold prices rise. And when gold prices rise, stock markets fall. And when the gold price falls, just the opposite. So I am worried about a rising gold price. Now, I'm going to end this on an optimistic note that my buddy Arthur Laffer, who's one of the smartest economists, thinks that we peaked on gold. And he thinks, for those of you who are gold bugs, it's probably too late. This is according to Art Laffer, to buy gold, because it's already gone up by 100%. So you're probably, making the mistake of buying high when you always want to buy low. So that's a little piece of investment advice. I talked in the earlier section of this show about how the progressive mayors in our blue cities are destroying the cities of America. And I've also mentioned that I'm from Chicago. I hail from the suburbs of Chicago. I love Chicago. But it's being ruined by Mayor Brandon Johnson, who is a progressive left-wing teacher union representative. He doesn't represent the taxpayers. He represents the unions and the teachers' unions. And so he has a task force that has proposed 39 new taxes, because they have such a big hole in their budget. My friends at the Illinois Policy Center wrote this, and I want to quote this because it just shows you how crazy the progressives are. It says, this is from Illinois Policy Center. Chicago already has a reputation for predatory fines, from vehicle sticker tickets to late fines, that disproportionately impact low-income households in Chicago. Research has documented how these policies can push families into bankruptcy. Well, guess what? If you do that in New York and all these other cities, that's exactly what's going to happen. You cannot tax your way to prosperity. That's one of the themes of the More Money Show. Higher taxes lead to poverty. They don't lead to making poor people rich. They make rich people poor. They never work. They haven't worked. And by the way, the cities that have high income taxes also, they tend to be the cities that are falling behind. Why is this so freaking hard for people to understand? I mean, it's as obvious as the sun rising in the east and setting in the west that these things are going to happen. And it happens over and over and over again. And then my liberal friends are surprised that somehow they really do believe you can tax your way to prosperity. Show me. Somebody show me. I'm open to it. I want to find out any place that has made themselves rich by raising their taxes. It just doesn't work, folks. Okay, this is the More Money Show. I'm kind of laughing because if I weren't laughing about this, I'd have to cry. Be right back.
The More Money Show with Steve Moore on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The More Money Show with Steve Moore on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back, folks. This is Steve Moore. This is the More Money Show. This is WABC. Thanks so much to my friend John Catsimatidis for giving me the privilege of being in front of this microphone. I love it. I love doing radio. I love talking to you. I love getting the feedback from you. I get a lot of angry people get angry at me. I got a lot of people who like what I'm saying, and I love to hear back. And I learn a lot from people who criticize me, including my wife. So don't be bashful. If you'd like to contact me, to go to unleashprosperity.com. And I do read the mail. I do read the emails. I do read your texts, and I learn a lot from them. And even when people get mad at me, I think it helps make me a better radio talk show host. I'm new to the game, so I learn a lot every time I do it, and I learn from you. And I've always said this, even from the people who disagree with me. Look, this is freedom of speech radio. You can disagree with me, just don't be disagreeable. Can't we do that as a country? Can't we disagree without being disagreeable? Why is that so hard? So I do really appreciate when I hear back from people, and I think it makes me a better host of the show because. And incidentally, it helps me on my job of being an economic policy analyst when I can gauge what people are thinking and how they're feeling about things. I've always said that, of course, one of my heroes, the guy who kind of invented talk radio was, of course, Rush Limbaugh, and I had the privilege of going on Rush's show every now and then and getting to know Rush, and really admired him so much, as we all did. But I have to say that I always wondered, why is it that Rush Limbaugh is so ahead of everybody else in terms of what's happening in America? How is it that he has his finger on the pulse of how Americans are feeling about things? And the politicians, you'd think they'd understand you'd think they'd be listening to their constituents and they'd figure it out. But Rush was way ahead of everybody else. That's why he saw the Newt Gingrich revolution in '93. He saw, before he died, he realized that Trump was going to be the man. And how did he know that? How did he know that before anybody else did? And the reason is because, in my opinion, every single day, Rush Limbaugh was talking to average people, normal people, not average people, nobody's average. Normal people who are not involved in politics, people who just lead, they lead normal lives, and he listened to them. And, it doesn't take a big sample of people to realize what are concerning people and what aren't concerning people. Trump is an expert on that. Whether you like Donald Trump or not, he really does have his finger on the pulse of what Americans think. When I first met Donald Trump in 2016, early 2016, many of you heard me tell this story before, I had the privilege of having a meeting with Larry Kudlow, and we spent about an hour and a half with Donald Trump in his office there on Fifth Avenue in New York. I'd never met the guy before, and I'm like, boy, this guy gets it. And I don't. We argue about things. I argue about things with Trump all the time. I mean, sometimes I love most of the things he does. I'm not a big tariff guy, as most of you know. I'm not a big fan of the tariffs, but I respect the fact that Trump listens, and sometimes he'd agree with me, sometimes he wouldn't. If I came in with an idea, I remember one of my favorite moments. I went to him in I think it was late March of 2020 during COVID. And we had, remember what was it, 2-3 weeks to stop the spread or whatever it was. And I said, Mr. President, you've got to get this economy reopened. This is idiotic to shut down the entire American economy, the businesses, the restaurants, the stores, the churches, the playgrounds. It was the most idiotic things America has ever done was shut down our economy. And I said, why don't you make Easter Sunday, which is coming up, this was like the week before Easter, Liberation Day. And we're going to reopen everything. And Trump said, that's a great idea. And I'll never forget, he went an hour later, went out in front of all the cameras and said, Easter Sunday is going to be Liberation Day. And oh my God, the president, everybody's going to die. He's going to kill everyone. And of course, we now know that, I think you know this, that the lockdowns killed many, many more people than COVID did. So anyway, this is why I appreciate you all listening and giving me the feedback. And I like the criticism. I don't like to be criticized, but I learn a lot from the criticism, and I learn a lot from when I love it, especially when people say, hey, Steve Moore, you're absolutely right on things, because everybody loves to be patted on the back. I was talking earlier about something that I feel so strongly about, and I apologize for repeating it, but I feel so strongly about this. I need an army of people behind this idea. We talked about it in the previous hour. An Operation Warp Speed for finding the cure for these diseases and letting people. Why does the FDA have to literally bottle up these drugs for years before they can come out? I mean, everyone knows someone who's suffering from a terrible disease: Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis, heart disease, all the terrible forms of cancer. I have a niece who I love dearly who has epilepsy, and she's struggled her whole life with this. And it's been such a terrible thing for her family. She's a wonderful girl, but epilepsy has really stunted her growth. And there are ways to cure these things. This is 2025. We have an incredible medical industry that is always finding new ways to either cure these things or at least reduce the pain and suffering, or at least slow the progress of these diseases. I'm involved in some drug, and by the way, just by I'm on the payroll of some of these companies that have really good drugs that look really promising. I can't say that they 100% that they work, but so far they look really effective. One of them deals with a disease called Alexia, which is horrible. It only affects about, I think, 10,000 people a year, but it's just an awful, paralyzing disease. Why wouldn't you let someone, I mean, seriously, why wouldn't you let someone try a drug if they have a horrible disease? What's going to be the cost? I mean, in other words, let's say they try it and it doesn't work. So what? I mean, is their life any better? But there's a chance it may work, and you might be able to save this person's life. Why not do that? Why is the FDA holding these drugs back? So I want, and I'm going to repeat this again, I want Donald Trump to declare Operation Warp Speed for cancer, for multiple sclerosis, for Alzheimer's, for diabetes, for epilepsy, on all these horrible diseases, and let people try them. And and Trump is good on this. I think he really wants to do this. Operation Warp Speed was an enormous lifesaver. Thank God Trump was in the White House in 2020 when COVID hit, because if Biden had been in, they would have locked up the whole economy for a year. We wouldn't have had Operation Warp Speed, and millions more people around the world would have died. And if we had Operation Warp Speed for COVID, why not for every disease? Seriously, why not? And I'd love, if you disagree with me, tell me why. Now, I understand we've had episodes in the United States where we put out a drug on the market and it had very adverse side effects and people died. And I forget the name of what was it? I forget. But there was a famous incident in the 50s or 60s where a lot of people died from putting a drug on the market prematurely. So what I'm saying is, let's first, if the drug isn't going to cause harm, in other words, if we can prove at least it's safe, then let people try it. Because what do they got to lose? Especially if it's a horrible, crippling disease. I really feel strong about this, folks. I'm 65 now. I worry about, Alzheimer's. I worry about Parkinson's and all these terrible things. I don't want to get it. I don't want anybody to get these diseases. We can cure these things. And incidentally, the cure rate for these things, the more that we encourage our great, biomedical researchers to come up with this stuff and make money. Look, the profit motive works. I know a lot of people hate the profit motive, but it works. It works. And it's what leads to innovation. We see this in the tech industry. It works. It happens. It works in the biomedical industry. The more we give a return for people to come up with these cures, the more we're going to see them and the more lives we're going to save. And so let's do it. Why not? I'm Steve Moore. This is The More Money Show. We'll be right back.
The More Money Show with Steve Moore on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The More Money Show with Steve Moore.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back, folks. This is The More Money Show. I wanted to bring on my good friend Scott Rasmussen of RMG Research because he is one of the top pollsters in the country, as you know, and also does the most interesting polls just about of anyone. So, Scott, thanks for joining again.
Steve, it's always great to chat with you.
So a couple things I wanted to talk to you about, Scott. One is I want to go back to something that you and I worked on, 2 or 3 years ago, a kind of elite opinion versus, average American opinions. And I think that study had an enormous impact on the voting of people. Explains a lot about why Trump won, in my opinion, in 2024, because I think the elites of America were out of touch. First of all, can you just very quickly review some of those amazing findings? And then I want to ask you about whether there's still this divide between normal Americans and elite Americans.
Well, I can answer the second question first, which is yes, the divide exists. We did this research when I first came to you with the thesis. We noticed that people who had a postgraduate degree were out of touch with just about everybody else. And so were people who lived in large urban centers, places like Manhattan, and, of course, people who had a higher income. So we put the three of those categories together, and it turns out about 1% of voters have all three of those attributes. We call them the elite 1%. Yeah. And the survey we did with you, the first finding that shocked me was that about half of these elites think the rest of us have too much individual freedom.
Yeah, unbelievable.
And by the way, among the elites who talk politics all the time, about 7 out of 10 said we have too much individual freedom.
And by the way, they have, sorry to interrupt you, Scott, but you know what? They have almost disdain for real, everyday Americans.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, most of them say that you should not be allowed to vote unless you have a college degree, which means they want to
be a disaster.
Franchise half the country. And by the way, that sounds to me a lot like the old Jim Crow laws.
Exactly.
You get rid of the people.
Maybe the next thing I'm going to say is you have to be white to be able to vote.
But they trust the government.
Yes.
They don't. Most of them believe we should ban ownership of private ownership of guns.
Right.
They want to ban
air conditioning,
and gas-powered cars. But here's the kicker: among the politically active elites, 82% of them think that most Americans agree with them on important issues,
and they don't.
So they don't, but they're delusional about it, and that's a big part of the reason they're so out of touch.
So I was so proud to partner with you on that at Unleash Prosperity. I think it had a huge impact, and I think Americans get the joke now that these people do hold them in disdain, and this confirmed my suspicions in dealing with elites, because I deal with elites all the time, which is that they believe they're morally, intellectually, and culturally superior to the rest of us.
That's exactly right. And, if you go back when you and I were in school, we learned about a thing called groupthink and how it led to the Bay of Pigs debacle and other things. A big event for my life was worrying about the Vietnam War. And David Halberstam wrote that book on how the best and the brightest.
Yep.
And it's because they think they're smarter than everybody else. And when something contradicts their view, they just dismiss it.
One thing, that's an interesting point you just made. I did read that book by Halberstam. I was always against the Vietnam War because I grew up with brothers who did not want to go to Vietnam, and it was fun. And it was a perfect example, by the way, of it took the elites 7 or 8 years before they caught up with Americans who said, we don't want to be in Vietnam.
Right.
So I think you're really onto something. So let me go back to that first point I made. You started to answer it, which is we did that study 3 years ago.
2 years ago, yeah.
Is there been did the elites get it now that they're out of touch, or are they still out of touch?
Well, they're still out of touch. With the Neapolitan Institute, we've done some further studies, and we see the exact same sorts of attitudes, and they just don't. They're in different worlds. And look, we saw this in the 2024 campaign. How many times did you hear economists say the American people are wrong? The economy is doing great. Look at our numbers.
Right.
No, it wasn't great. People knew what was going on, but because they were so isolated, they just didn't see it. And let's be honest, for people in an elite bubble, inflation didn't matter. The price of gas didn't matter. None of those things really affected their life, but it sure did a lot of everyday Americans. So the gap is there. It's growing bigger. And by the way, Steve, I have a book that will be coming out dealing with this topic next March.
Oh,
so
we'll
what's
the title?
A lot more. Well, I can't tell you that until the publisher finalizes it. But you can be sure it's about the theme of this elitist revolt.
Well, fantastic. We'll definitely want to get you back on when that book comes out. By the way, I just got a text from a couple people to talk about Vietnam, and I want to make clear I have nothing but respect for people who wore the uniform and fought for our country. I just think the war was unfortunate. We shouldn't have been there. So I think you
Steve, I'm a couple of years older than you, and I had to get my draft card. It was at the tail end, and it didn't matter. Because we weren't going to be drafted. But yes, I share that. I have a special anger towards our elites of that era for getting us in and keeping us in so long. Part of my anger is the way they treated people who who came back and they simply ignored
awful.
these heroes. So I'm with you on that. I think the war was wrong, but the treatment, those who went and served deserve our thanks and respect.
It's so interesting we're having this conversation because I think that also affected the Republicans and what happened in Iran and Iraq and Afghanistan, where the public was way ahead of the elites who said, we have to go in. And, now I think there's a general consensus that it was a huge mistake, $2 trillion down the drain. It didn't accomplish a lot. Americans don't want America to be the world's policeman, do they?
No, they would like us to be engaged in the world's world discussion. They don't want us to curl up and ignore everybody else.
Right.
But one of the very first poll I ever did back in the late '80s was on two topics. One of them was Social Security, and the other was NATO. Mm-hmm. And as far back as the late '80s, Americans were angry that NATO countries weren't paying their fair share. Obviously, Donald Trump brought it up as an issue decades later. But once again, the voters were ahead. They saw this was a problem. They didn't want us to get out of NATO. They didn't want us to get out of the treaty, but they thought everybody else should chip in as well.
Yeah, and Trump picked that up instantly. So one of the things we were talking about earlier on the show was an idea I have, Scott, and I want to run it by you because I'd love you to maybe do some polling on this because you're one of the top pollsters in the country. So I'm very much in favor. We talked earlier in the show of something called Operation Warp Speed for cancer, for heart disease, for multiple sclerosis, so we can bring promising new drugs to the markets sooner and run do a end run around the FDA, which oftentimes holds up these drugs. And we'd tell people, look, this is this may not work, but we're if you have, let's say, MS, this may help you. And I wonder if you could ask Americans what they think about that idea of, like, if you want to use it, a kind of right to try idea.
Yeah, so we've done some polling over the years on the right to try, and people generally support that. One of the things in almost all healthcare polling is that people are kind of uncomfortable about anything without any controls. And so what we have found is very effective is to leave the decision up to individual state insurance commissioners. Because
I'm sorry, say that again. Leave it up to who?
To a state insurance commissioner, to a state official, because the state commission, the health commissioner in Idaho might deal with things differently than one in California or New York.
And maybe red states might be more likely to approve these things than blue states. So we've only got a couple minutes left. I'm talking to the great pollster, Scott Rasmussen. The last thing I wanted to ask you about, Scott, is this debacle of the government shutdown, which is, I think most Americans think is just crazy, regardless of which side you're on. And I think Trump is in the right here. But what are you finding?
Well, like everybody else, we find that Republicans get a little more blame than Democrats. In our latest numbers, it's 40% say it's the Republican fault, 31% say the Democrats' fault. But the truth of the matter is it's not that big a deal.
Right.
Only 24% of voters are following the story closely. And by the way, 18% do not know that there's a shutdown.
That's amazing.
This is not going to be an issue in 2026. Assuming that the shutdown ends in the next couple of weeks or month. It's just one of those issues that's a huge deal in Washington and the rest of America. It's another year, another shutdown.
So we got 2 minutes left, Scott. You always have so many fascinating poll results. Is there anything that anything that you've been working on lately that you found in your polling that you think our listeners would be interested in?
Well, there's an awful lot of topics out there, but the one thing that I've been trying to draw attention to a little bit is that next year we're going to have a big birthday party. Our country turns 250, and we're doing some special research on that. But I think it's important to recognize that our political leaders may have their own view of these things, and we may be cynical about some of our neighbors sometimes. But the American people continue to broadly embrace the founding ideals of freedom, equality, self-governance. That has never wavered. And I think it's important to remember that because it just never slips into our political debate. Well, I actually think that's going to be an issue in 2026 because there are some on the far left of the great political divide who think America is a bad place. So
that was the last thing I wanted to ask you about is, that I've been telling Trump and my friends in the Trump administration this whole theme of a kind of a new patriotism.
Yep.
And I wonder how you think that are Americans patriotic?
Oh, absolutely. Steve, we don't have time to go into all of it right now, but we've just completed a series of open-end discussions with 5 Americans from every congressional district, asking them what freedom means in the 21st century. What does equality mean? What are these ideas? What is the American dream?
Right.
And nobody talks like Thomas Jefferson anymore, but the ideals are still there.
Oh, that warms my heart. That warms my heart. Great message to end on. Hey, Scott, thanks so much. Let us know when the book is coming out so we can have you back on. That's Scott Rasmussen, one of the the country's top pollsters. We'll be right back, folks. This is The More Money Show.
The More Money Show with Steve Moore on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The More Money Show with Steve Moore.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back, folks. This is The More Money Show. We're coming to the end of our 2-hour segment. Thanks so much for joining the show. We have affiliates throughout the country, and I'm so appreciative of being able to be in front of this microphone and to pontificate. But hopefully, I am educating you, and I really appreciate the loyal listeners. I always say we have the smartest listeners in the country on this show. In our final minutes, I wanted to mention that I was really so privileged to be a presenter at an event the other night called the Nest Point Foundation on American Exceptionalism, where we really paid tribute to so many amazing people in every walk of life that have so contributed to America. And one of them was my friend Harris Faulkner. You know her from Fox News, obviously. Pete Hegseth, who's doing an incredible job for our country in securing our national security and national defense. Great award presented to Megyn Kelly, who is just a fantastic friend. I love Megyn. She's one of the top journalists in the country, and on and on and on. And when I was thinking about this great presentation award ceremony, why don't we as a nation celebrate American greatness? Why is it that so many people on the left? We can disagree on policy issues. We can disagree on tax cuts and healthcare reform and what to do about our budget deficit and, what should there be our Israel policy. We can disagree on those things. But can't we all agree on American greatness? Because I've got to tell you, we are the richest, greatest country on the planet. And that doesn't mean that we don't have flaws. Of course we do. We've had terrible stains. Slavery, segregation, horrible things that have happened in this country. But what a nation this is. And I was thinking about this the other day when I got into an Uber, and this Uber driver was from Africa. And he was saying, Steve, everyone wants to come to America because everyone around the world thinks that America is the land of opportunity. And I said, I wish Americans realized that we are the land of opportunity and how blessed we are to be in this great country. And the reason I mention this is there's too many academics and what I call the pinheads who look back at American history and then denigrate it. And we're the greatest experiment ever in human freedom and human achievement. And we're human beings. We are flawed. But why did they always emphasize the negative about America? If you read the textbooks, the history textbooks, it's a racist country. It's a sexist country. We killed all the Indians. Come on. What about the amazing things that happen in this country? And I'm so glad that we have groups like Nest Point Foundation that are celebrating American greatness. One last point. Why is it that the people who built this country, who made America great, The people like Henry Ford, the people like John D. Rockefeller, the people like Dale Carnegie. I could go on with the people who built this country. Why are they denigrated as robber barons? Robber barons, they were the ones who created steel. They're the ones who created the railroads. They're the ones who created the energy. They're the ones who created the libraries. They're the ones. I mean, they built this country and they created whole industries, and they weren't robber barons. Every industry that they created, they reduced costs of. They reduced the cost of transportation. They reduced the J.P. Morgan reduced the price of financial services. I could go on and on. I do not understand why these people are denigrated. Yeah, they got rich. You have a problem with that? You have a problem with somebody getting rich? I don't. We all want to be rich, and we all want to and you can only get rich in a free market system by giving people what they want. Now, if you're a thief, that's not a way to get rich, and we want to throw those people in jail. But people who build industries, as we've done, I mean, Bill Gates is a genius, and think about what he has done for our country. Think about Steve Jobs, a genius. Think about Elon Musk. And I don't always agree with Elon Musk, but my God, he's creating incredible industries. So we need to celebrate American greatness, our entrepreneurs, and not regard them as villains, but heroes. I'm Steve Moore. That's the message for the week. Hope you all have a great week ahead, and we will be back same bat time, same bat channel next week.
Thanks for listening to More Money with Steve Moore. You can hear More Money with Steve Moore Saturday afternoons at 1. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?
The following is a paid political announcement.
Lifelong Democrat Diana Florence served for 25 years as a Manhattan prosecutor under DA Robert Morgenthau. She put criminals away, stood up for victims, and protected our streets. Now, Diana is challenging failed Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg as an independent because it's time for a DA who fights for our families, not criminals. That's why Diana has won the support of organized labor like the steamfitters, plumbers, and ironworkers, everyday New Yorkers who want a DA they can trust. Manhattan needs a DA who will do the job, prosecute crime. That's Diana Florence. Under Alvin Bragg, crime is up and prosecutions are down. Bragg doesn't prosecute crime. He plays partisan politics. Bragg failed to protect women and failed to protect workers. As a prosecutor, Diana Florence won groundbreaking convictions, fighting against corruption, domestic violence, wage left, and deadly working conditions. She's always been a partner of unions, community groups, and to cops like us. For Manhattan District Attorney, vote for Diana Florence. Diana for DA.com. Paid for by Diana for Manhattan DA.